A billionaire, vowed love was dead to him, until a waitress threw herself in front of a speeding car to save his daughter. The Manhattan skyline glittered like broken glass, and Alexander Pierce believed nothing beautiful was safe. He ruled empires from a lonely penthouse, a widower with a heart encased in ice. Miles away, Maya Rivera wiped diner tables under flickering neon, unaware destiny was already running toward her. An 8-year-old girl slipped past her bodyguards, chasing freedom into a rain-slick street. Tires screamed, metal flashed, and in that breathless instant, two worlds collided, and everything Alexander swore off came crashing back. Alexander Pierce's world was a fortress of glass and steel, perched 60 stories above Manhattan's restless streets. To outsiders, it looked like a kingdom. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's heartbeat in lights, and every surface gleamed as if polished to perfection. The elevator doors whispered shut with a soundless sigh, sealing him away from the noise, the chaos, the vulnerability of the world below. People called him untouchable, a man who could buy anything, control everything, and bend fate to his will. But inside, Alexander felt like a ghost haunting his own empire. Wealth had given him everything except what mattered. His company, Pierce Global Holdings, stretched across continents. Luxury resorts in the Maldives, aerospace ventures in Seattle, shipping lines in Singapore. Yet, when the meetings ended and the private jets cooled on the tarmac, silence waited for him in his penthouse like an unwelcome companion. He could stand at his panoramic window, watch the skyline sparkle, and feel utterly alone. He had been a different man once. There had been laughter in these rooms, tiny feet pattering on marble floors, and the warm voice of his wife, Elena, softening even the sharpest corners of his world. Elena had been sunlight, a journalist with a quick wit and a reckless spirit that fascinated him. She'd teased him out of his rigid schedules, coaxed him to dance barefoot in the kitchen, and taught him that love was worth every risk. And then, in one unthinkable night 3 years ago, a storm-slick road and a swerving truck had stolen her away. Alexander remembered the phone call that split his life in two. He remembered the rain hammering the hospital windows as doctors' lips moved with words he couldn't process. He remembered holding her hand, already cold, and promising her he would keep their daughter safe. Since then, he had built walls around his heart so high, even his little girl, Lila, could barely climb them. At 8 years old, Lila was a bright, curious spark in an otherwise dark world. She had Elena's mischievous smile and her unfiltered honesty, qualities that pierced Alexander's armor when he least expected it. But Lila was lonely. He saw it in the way she lingered by the window after her tutors left, in the way she watched other families at the park when his security detail wasn't looking. Alexander tried to fill the gap with gifts, a piano delivered on her birthday, tickets to sold-out Broadway shows, even a miniature horse flown in for a weekend. But toys and luxuries couldn't replace bedtime stories or kitchen dances. The city whispered about him. Board members speculated that he would remarry soon, that a powerful businessman needed a poised socialite wife by his side. Invitations from wealthy widows and ambitious heiresses stacked up on his mahogany desk, unopened. He dismissed them all. Love was chaos, and chaos had already taken too much. Marriage was a battlefield he would never step onto again. He lived now by rules, schedules precise to the minute, security details mapped to every movement, emotions locked behind an impenetrable facade. To Alexander, control was safety, and safety was the only way to keep Lila from suffering another loss. Still, there were nights, quiet, dangerous nights, when he would stand at the window, scotch in hand, and feel the ache of longing creep in. It wasn't just for Elena. It was for the man he'd been with her. Lighter, freer, capable of joy without fear. Below, the city pulsed with life he no longer touched. Lovers kissing under umbrellas, children laughing in the rain, strangers meeting eyes across crowded subway cars. Somewhere out there, the world kept daring to hope. Alexander turned away from the window, convinced he was safer without it. But fate had other plans. The evening began like any other, a neatly penciled square on Alexander Pierce's calendar, another business dinner at the Mandarin's private rooftop. Outside, Manhattan shimmered beneath a misty drizzle, its taxis hissing across rain-slicked avenues. Inside, crystal glasses chimed, and the city's elite murmured over aged Bordeaux. Alexander nodded through discussions of mergers and market forecasts, but his thoughts hovered elsewhere, on Lila, on the hollowness of these rooms without Elena, on the nagging fear that his daughter's laughter had grown rarer. Lila, restless and sharp-eyed beyond her 8 years, had been left with her nanny and 2 discreet security guards. They meant well, but to a child who craved something genuine, their constant watch felt like a cage. That night, as the drizzle thickened to rain, Lila slipped on a hoodie, tugged the strings tight, and whispered to herself, "Just for a little while." The guards had grown complacent, one distracted by a phone call, the other by a passing delivery. In a heartbeat, she was gone, darting down the service stairs of the apartment building and into the bustling streets. Brooklyn's diner lights glowed like beacons in the mist, and that was where Maya Rivera's shift dragged toward closing time. She was bone-tired, her fingers aching from balancing plates and pouring coffee for weary regulars. But even exhaustion couldn't dull her warmth. When a homeless veteran came in for shelter, she quietly slipped him a slice of pie and paid for it herself. When an elderly couple argued softly over the bill, she smoothed things over with a joke and a smile. So when the diner's bell jingled, and a small, hooded figure slipped onto a stool near the window, Maya's first instinct was tenderness. "Cold night to be out," she said gently, sliding a mug of cocoa toward the child. Lila peeked up, wide brown eyes framed by damp lashes. "Thanks," she whispered, cupping the mug as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Minutes stretched. The city's pulse outside blurred into a soft background hum. Maya, sensing the girl's loneliness, chatted lightly about the rain and the city's best hot chocolate spots. Lila laughed, a sound fragile but bright. Then came the screech. It was subtle at first, a faraway horn, a car's tires losing their grip on wet pavement. Maya's head snapped toward the window. Outside, the small figure of Lila had hopped down from the stool, enchanted by a stray paper boat spinning through a puddle. She stepped off the curb, chasing it, unaware of the sedan fishtailing toward her. Time fractured. Maya didn't think. She moved. The mug of cocoa crashed to the floor. Chairs clattered as she bolted through the door, feet splashing through rainwater. The car's headlights carved cruel white arcs across the slick street. Lila froze, a deer in sudden light. "Move!" Maya's shout tore through the rain. She lunged, arms outstretched, and scooped Lila just as the car skidded past. Metal screamed against asphalt, sparks flared, and the smell of burnt rubber filled the night. The car clipped a hydrant and vanished down the block, leaving chaos in its wake. Maya landed hard on her side, the pavement tearing skin from her palms. Pain flared hot, but she barely felt it. Lila clung to her neck, sobbing. Maya's breath came in sharp gasps, heart pounding like a drumbeat of adrenaline. Around them, pedestrians cried out, phones lifted, sirens in the distance, and then headlights. a sleek black SUV roared up, brakes squealing. Doors flew open, and men in tailored coats and earpieces spilled onto the street. At their center was Alexander Pierce. For a man whose composure was legend, his face now was unrecognizable, wide-eyed, pale, and utterly undone. He ran to them, scooping Lila into his arms, clutching her so tightly she squeaked in protest. His gaze snapped to Maya. Rain plastered her dark hair to her face, her chest still heaving from the sprint. For a heartbeat, they simply stared. Two strangers, locked by the gravity of what had just unfolded. Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, frayed at the edges. Maya flexed her scraped hands, forcing a shaky laugh. Just wet and a little scuffed up. "She's okay. That's what matters." The billionaire, the man who could buy islands and topple markets, seemed momentarily lost for words. He opened his mouth, closed it, then managed, You saved her." Lila peeked from his shoulder, whispering, "She gave me cocoa." In that moment, amid the rain, the flashing streetlights, the whispering crowd, Alexander's world tilted. He had built walls around his life, convinced no one could touch him again. Yet here stood a woman from a world far from his own, her bravery and kindness shattering his certainty in a single heartbeat. The sirens grew closer, the guards swarmed, but Alexander's eyes stayed on Maya. Something unspoken passed between them, gratitude, shock, and a flicker of something neither dared to name. And that's when everything began to change. The morning after the rescue, Alexander's world should have returned to its carefully controlled rhythm. Meetings filled his schedule, contracts waited for signatures, and the city's skyline glittered as always. But the memory of rain on Maya's face, the tremble in her breath, and Lila's wide-eyed trust refused to fade. It lingered like a song he couldn't stop hearing. By noon, the tabloids had their headline, "Pierce Heiress Saved by Brooklyn Waitress. Who is she?" A single blurry photo, Alexander's hand on Maya's shoulder, splashed across every screen. Calls poured in from business partners, gossip columnists, and his board's elder statesman, Gregory Vance. And then came Vanessa. Vanessa Hartman had been in Alexander's orbit for years, a poised socialite and board member's daughter, adored by the press and tolerated by Alexander. They had attended charity galas together, posed for photos, but never truly connected. Vanessa had convinced herself that patience would win him over, that one day Alexander would realize a man like him needed a woman like her. Impeccable pedigree, perfect smile, zero risk. She stormed into his office, uninvited, heels clicking like gunfire against the marble. "Really, Alex? A diner waitress? You're feeding the tabloids like a rookie." Alexander didn't look up from the window. "She saved my daughter's life. That doesn't make her your soulmate." Vanessa's voice dripped with disdain. "Do you understand what this looks like?" The board is already whispering. Investors don't like messy distractions. He turned slowly, his eyes hardening. "Messy distractions? That distraction is the reason my daughter is alive today." Vanessa's perfect facade cracked for a second, jealousy flickering in her eyes. "You can't afford sentimentality. You know what they said after Elena, how reckless you were to marry a journalist. Do you want to make the same mistake twice?" The mention of Elena was a blade between his ribs. For a heartbeat, Alexander faltered, pain flashing across his face before the mask returned. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't use her." Vanessa pressed on, her voice softening, as if persuasion could replace cruelty. "I'm just reminding you. You have a duty. To Lila. To the company. You can't let some waitress with big eyes and a sob story jeopardize that." Something inside Alexander snapped. He slammed the crystal tumbler onto his desk so hard the sound echoed off the glass walls. "Enough, Vanessa." His voice was low, dangerous. "You don't get to decide who is worthy of respect. You weren't there. You didn't see her throw herself into the street for Lila. Don't you dare diminish that." For a moment, silence. Then Vanessa's composure returned, brittle and sharp. "Fine. But when the vultures circle, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned on her heel and left, the echo of her steps fading like distant thunder. Alexander's hand trembled slightly as he loosened his tie. The fortress he'd built around himself now felt fragile. He'd spent years convincing the world, and himself, that his heart was untouchable. Yet a waitress from Sextrom, Brooklyn had slipped past every defense. Later that evening, in the penthouse, Lila sat cross-legged on the couch, a sketchbook balanced on her knees. She had drawn Maya holding her hand, a crayon heart hovering above them. Alexander studied the picture quietly, an ache forming in his chest. Lila looked up, eyes bright. "Can we see her again, Daddy? She made me feel safe." Alexander swallowed hard. "Well, see," he said softly, but the truth was already there in his heart. He wanted to see her too. He glanced out at the city, its lights blinking like secrets in the night. Somewhere out there, Maya Rivera was closing up her diner shift, oblivious to the storm her courage had unleashed. But the biggest revelation was still to come. The following week was a blur of obligations, earnings calls, board votes, and charity luncheons, but Alexander found his attention fractured. Every polished surface in his penthouse seemed to reflect Maya's determined eyes. Lila asked about her constantly, weaving the waitress into bedtime stories and breakfast chatter. At last, Alexander arranged a quiet meeting. Not a gala, not a boardroom, just the cozy Brooklyn diner after closing. When he stepped inside, the neon sign flickered, casting warm red light over chrome counters. Maya was wiping tables, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up, exhaustion etched beneath her smile. "You didn't have to come yourself," she said, setting the rag aside. "I did," Alexander replied simply. "I owed you more than a phone call." For a moment, they stood awkwardly, two worlds colliding again. Then Maya gestured to a booth. They sat facing each other, the hum of the refrigerator their only witness. "I can't stop thinking about that night," Alexander admitted. "How fast it all could have ended. I thought I had everything under control, but in 1 second, his voice faltered. Maya's eyes softened. "You can't control everything, Alexander. None of us can." A pause stretched between them. Finally, Maya spoke again, quieter this time. "There's something you should know. About me." Alexander frowned. "What is it?" "My brother," she said, the words trembling. "Has 17. Since our parents died, I've been raising him alone. I work double shifts to keep him in school, to keep him out of trouble. People think waitressing is all I am, but it's survival. Every day, I'm just trying to hold us together." The admission hit Alexander harder than he expected. He saw the faint lines of worry at the corners of her eyes, the strength it took to carry so much. His mind flickered back to Vanessa's cutting words, a sob story, and shame burned in his chest. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to." She gave a brittle laugh. "People like you don't look at people like me long enough to find out." Alexander flinched at the truth in her words. He'd spent years convincing himself that control and power were enough, that emotion was weakness. But here sat a woman who had nothing but grit and love to offer, and somehow she was stronger than anyone he knew. Maya continued. "When I saw that car coming, I didn't think. I just moved. Maybe because I know what it's like to lose the only family you have left." Her voice wavered, then steadied. I couldn't let that little girl grow up with that kind of hole in her heart. Alexander felt his defenses crumble. He thought of Lila's laughter, of Elena's warmth, of the nights he'd stood at the window pretending the city lights could fill the void. For so long, he had kept love locked away, believing it was safer. But what kind of life was that? For him? For Lila? Then Maya said something that stopped him cold. Lila told me she sometimes pretends the security guards are invisible so she can feel normal for a while. She's not asking for castles or limousines, Alexander. She just wants you. The words struck deep. Alexander stared at the diner's scuffed floor, memories flashing, missed recitals, canceled weekend plans, bedtime stories told by nannies instead of him. He had been so focused on shielding his daughter from pain that he'd forgotten to give her joy. He looked up at Maya, eyes glinting with something raw. I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping her safe, keeping myself safe. Safety isn't the same as living, Maya whispered. Outside, rain tapped against the diner's windows, a gentle percussion to their silence. For the first time in years, Alexander felt the weight of his choices, of the life he'd built like a fortress to keep heartbreak at bay. He reached across the table, hesitated, then rested his hand lightly over hers. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was fragile, tentative, a first crack in the armor, and that was when he realized what truly mattered. Alexander Pierce was not a man accustomed to uncertainty, yet over the next few weeks, he found himself stepping into unfamiliar territory, into Maya's world, and, more importantly, into Lila's. His first attempt at reconnecting was clumsy. He insisted on bringing an entourage of security to the diner, only to watch Lila shrink behind Maya's apron, embarrassed. Maya's gentle but firm suggestion, maybe just you next time, cut through his pride. The next visit, Alexander arrived alone, sleeves rolled up, a tentative smile softening his polished exterior. He began small. Pancakes on Saturday mornings instead of board meetings, bedtime stories even when spreadsheets loomed. Lila beamed at every gesture, but Alexander could see the hesitation in her eyes, a silent question of whether these moments would last. Maya watched him, guarded yet hopeful. She saw a man trying, fumbling with a spatula in her cramped kitchen while cooking breakfast for 3, offering to tutor her brother in math despite his own packed schedule, slipping a discreet check into the diner's tip jar to cover a struggling regular's meal. These weren't grand billionaire gestures. They were human ones. One rainy evening, Alexander found himself sweeping crumbs off a diner table beside Maya after closing. He'd traded a black tie gala for the hum of a flickering neon sign, and to his surprise, the choice felt right. I used to think sacrifice meant giving things up, he said quietly. Now I think it might mean choosing what's worth holding on to. But adjusting wasn't effortless. There were setbacks, missed dinners when a crisis erupted at Pierce Global, whispered judgments from society pages, a furious Vanessa cornering him outside a board meeting, warning him he was throwing away everything for a woman who didn't belong. Each time, Alexander reminded himself of Maya's courage, of Lila's laughter returning like sunlight after a storm. Late one night, after walking Maya and Lila home, Alexander lingered on the sidewalk, gazing at their silhouettes framed in a warm kitchen window. His chest ached, not with loss this time, but with something fragile and alive. He was learning, adjusting, sacrificing, but deep down, he sensed the road ahead would not be gentle. But the hardest test was still ahead. The gala was supposed to be flawless, an annual Pierce Global charity event glittering with crystal chandeliers, cameras flashing like fireworks. But beneath the champagne sparkle, Tension pulsed like a live wire. Maya had reluctantly agreed to attend at Alexander's insistence, wearing a borrowed navy gown that made her feel like she'd stepped into the wrong world. Lila, clutching her father's hand, stared wide-eyed at the dazzling crowd. The whispers began immediately. Socialites eyed Maya like an intruder, their practiced smiles slicing like knives. Vanessa appeared, radiant in crimson silk, her voice sugary sweet as she approached Alexander. "So this is the woman who saved your daughter?" How quaint. Alexander's jaw tightened. "Show some respect, Vanessa," she smirked. "Respect? You're humiliating yourself, and this family name." The murmurs swelled. Maya's cheeks burned, but before she could retreat, Lila tugged free of Alexander's hand. The little girl stepped forward, chin trembling but eyes fierce. "Stop talking about her like that," she said, her small voice carrying through the stunned silence. "She saved me. She's brave, and she makes Daddy happy." The room froze. Cameras clicked. Maya's eyes filled with tears. Vanessa's expression faltered, but she recovered, hissing, "Alexander, don't let a waitress destroy everything you've built." Alexander took a deliberate step toward Maya, then another, until he stood beside her in the center of the ballroom. He reached for her hand, steady, certain. "She didn't destroy anything," he said, voice breaking just slightly. "She saved everything that mattered." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Maya's breath caught as his words wrapped around her like a shield. The board members, the socialites, even Vanessa, all blurred at the edges. What mattered was the warmth of Lila's small hand slipping into hers, the quiet relief in Alexander's eyes, and the knowledge that this fragile, impossible connection had survived the storm. Maya felt tears spill, not from shame or fear, but from a deep, unexpected joy. Alexander turned to Lila, voice gentle. "Sweetheart, is this what you want? For us to be together?" Lila nodded through her own tears. More than anything. Alexander tightened his hold on Maya's hand, lifting it for the world to see. Nothing would ever be the same again. Spring softened Manhattan's harsh skyline with a warm blush, and for the first time in years, Alexander Pierce woke with something gentler than ambition stirring in his chest. His mornings no longer began with boardroom calls, but with Lila's laughter echoing down the hall. He'd traded the sound of stock tickers for the sizzling of eggs in Maya's tiny kitchen, where he found joy in the mundane, spilled orange juice, mismatched plates, and the brush of Maya's hand against his as they reached for the same coffee mug. Their worlds were still different. Alexander occasionally stumbled, unsure how to balance billion-dollar deals with school pickups. Maya worried about fitting into the universe of glittering, parties, and private jets. But now they faced those worries together. He started showing up at the diner on Sunday afternoons, not as a billionaire to be admired or feared, but as a man learning the rhythm of family. He even surprised Maya by offering scholarships to the diner staff's kids, quietly using his power for kindness rather than control. One afternoon, beneath cherry blossoms in Central Park, Lila raced ahead, squealing with delight as she flew a new kite Alexander had clumsily assembled. Maya stood beside him, cheeks flushed from the brisk wind. He slipped his hand into hers, hesitating only for a heartbeat. When she didn't pull away, relief washed over him like sunlight. "You're quieter these days," Maya teased gently. "I finally realized some things are louder than money," he said, eyes following Lila's darting figure, like a child's laughter or the sound of someone believing in you. Maya's breath caught at the tenderness in his voice. She looked at him, not as a billionaire, not as a headline, but as a man who had been broken, who chose to rebuild with them. That evening, back at the diner after closing, Leela dozed off in a booth while Maya wiped the counters. Alexander pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Not a grand proposal yet, but a promise. Inside was a simple silver locket, engraved with Lila's initials and Maya's. He placed it gently in Maya's hand. "It's not a ring," he said quietly, "but it's a start. A second chance, if you'll have it." Maya's eyes shimmered, and for once, no words were needed. She leaned in, and under the hum of the neon lights, they kissed, soft, certain, and full of possibility. Outside, the city's heartbeat continued, but in that diner, a new story was just beginning, one built on courage, forgiveness, and the kind of love that defied every expectation. Love had found them again, and this time they wouldn't let it slip away.